Observing myself as a critical reader in English 201. My understanding of reader response theory. In The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, I found that I applied the reader response theory by recording my thoughts throughout the piece. This is not something I would normally do, but I found that it made it easier to keep track of what was happening in the story. I also think that posing questions about the author and why they did certain things is something that keeps the reader engaged beyond the time frame of reading the text. I really questioned how the author decided to think of this topic. I think that is very relevant in life today, with the idea of mob mentality being very consuming and making a situation worse. This story also reminded me of the show Black Mirror and Twilight Zone, which I find very interesting because it is obscure, similar to this reading. I think that the point of the story was to address the power of conformity. Throughout this piece, I found myself constantly questioning the behavior of characters and how they could go through with this. I think that it was beneficial for me to question what I was reading so that I could get a more comprehensive understanding of the literature. Things I observed about my critical reading by applying reading strategies. In the things that they carried, I really got a good feel for true imagery. Often, I find it hard to relate to stories as I struggle to find imagery. However, in this piece, I found that by taking the time to understand what the author was writing, it made me feel more connected to the piece and ultimately leading it to be my favorite piece of the semester. For example, Tim O'Brien writes, carried M16 maintenance gear, rods and steel brushes. Some carried the M79 grenade launcher, 5.9 pounds unloaded. I would not normally know what any of these things were, let alone how much they weigh. By looking them up, it made me be able to interpret the story that much easier. I also think that giving the weights of each object made it easy to visualize how much equipment the soldiers have to carry. By taking the time to really understand the equipment in the story, I found that it made the story more enjoyable to read. As a kid, I feel that teachers were always trying to make us identify the theme of pieces, and we always just said something simple. However, in this class, I found that my skills of identifying theme definitely developed over time. Some of the stories I struggled to find the theme, and rereading and taking the time to truly analyze the text helped immensely. In The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, I sat there pondering the theme for a while. However, after rereading the story and annotating the text, I found that I was able to get the true overall meaning that the author was trying to convey. I think that this is important because you should be able to look at something and take away the meaning of it, because you will not always have the time to constantly be rereading. However, in this class, I found that the skill of reading certain passages over and over again helped me get a better understanding of the theme. Digital tools. The tool I found most helpful during this semester was definitely Flipgrid. Being in an online class, I wasn't sure how the interactions with my classmates were going to go. However, I found that Flipgrid was able to deepen my understanding of each piece of literature because I got to hear multiple perspectives on the same piece. I found that everyone interprets text differently, and hearing the many perspectives made me consider different thoughts about the text and be more open-minded as a person. In this course, I found that we had to use a lot of critical reading analysis skills as we did in CIT. In this class, we were constantly annotating text, doing character analysis, and trying to figure out the overall meaning of what the author is trying to tell the audience. I found myself having to reread multiple pieces in the class in order to try to get the meaning of the story. In CIT, almost all of the passages we read were very difficult to interpret after just one reading. I was always rereading the text in order to try and understand the overall picture of what the author was saying. I also found that annotating the text in that class and breaking it down line by line helped me get a clear understanding of the characters and what was happening in the piece. I think the overlap of the skills in these two classes definitely helped me to succeed in both. The most challenging piece of literature for me in this class was Hills Like White Elephants by Ernest Hemingway. I found that this piece was extremely difficult for me to understand, and I really did not know what was going on while reading it. At first, I tried to reread because that is usually something that is helpful to me. However, in this case, it did not provide much clarity for me than reading it the first time around. I decided to reach out to my peers that had read the same piece, but to no avail. I then decided to read it a third time. This time, I began to see the message a little more clearly. I also looked up the unfamiliar references, such as Dos Cervezas or Anis del Toro. By looking up these terms, I was able to get a little more context of the story. I also found that looking up words I did not know helped me get a better overall understanding of the story. Most of the struggles I faced in this class had to do with comprehension, and I found that looking up words and certain cultural references helped me get a better understanding overall. My most memorable experience with literature in this class has to be with the story Two Kinds by Amy Tan. When I first read this story, I thought that the mother was rude and really just not accepting of her daughter. However, after rereading the story, I came to realize that the mother was only trying to make her daughter the best she could be. I found that I saw the mother did have a soft side and was just trying to give her daughter a life that would lead her to success. I think this piece in particular made me a better critical reader because it was probably some of the most arduous character analysis that I had to do this semester. I think it is easy to sometimes judge characters on the surface and not really see their true intentions. Tan wrote, "But my mother's expression was what devastated me, a quiet, blank look that said she had lost everything." Throughout the piece, she had been pushing and pushing her daughter to be something that her daughter was resisting. However, when her mother chose to be silent after her performance, I think that it illustrates that her mother had her daughter's best interest at heart. She just felt so disheartened and realized that pushing her daughter was not the way to keep her around. I thought that this was really sweet and showed that sometimes you have to take the time to analyze characters and focus in on what is happening between the lines in order to really understand their intentions. My aha moment this semester was definitely from reading the war poetry. I think that these poems really hit home for me, as someone I know is in the military and I have the utmost respect for the men and women serving our country. I think this made it more emotional for me, and I really enjoyed reading these pieces. I also think that writing my own poem made me realize just how much the armed services have to go through and sacrifice every day. I think that reading these poems just made me really emotional, and I was able to channel that into my poem. I think that from this point on, I realized how passionate I was about the topic of the military, and I really realized that literature can have a lasting effect on your life outside of the classroom. I like that I was able to channel the emotions I was feeling into a poem, and at least attempt to show the gratitude I feel for these brave soldiers. These pieces were the first in the semester that were able to make me feel super emotional and connected to them past the few assignments we had to do. I think that having to read a certain text, analyze it, and expand upon it in your own writing is something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life, thanks to this class. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed.